this is Harry Shearer, and you are listening to TV Confidential, a radio show about television.
Hi, it's John Candy here. I really don't have much time to talk to people. Unfortunately, I've got to be downstairs in the basement here in this strange building that we're recording from, working with Doug Thompson, the producer of the show, to write a show for you people, a weekly show.
Ed Robertson welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television. We'll spend this segment talking about radio, mostly radio, some television, as we welcome Mr. Doug Thompson. In the course of his 60-year career in radio and TV broadcasting, Doug Thompson has written and produced more than 1,000 hours of radio program for broadcast all over the world, across the U.S. as well as in Canada. He's also written and directed about 30 TV documentaries for Canadian television, as well as made many radio documentaries heard in both the U.S. and in Canada. Doug has interviewed more than 500 singers, producers, studio musicians, and songwriters, everyone from ABBA to Frank Zappa. Plus, he has worked with such entertainment legends as Ringo Starr, Spencer Davis, Jim Henson, the Monkees, and John Candy. Matter of fact, Doug Thompson created 3 radio shows for John Candy, including one that was heard coast to coast in the U.S. at the height of Candy's film popularity. Plus, he knew John Candy long before that, back when John was still honing his improv skills in the 70s with the Toronto branch of Second City. Doug is here to share a few memories of his career as part of our program today. Doug Thompson, welcome to TV Confidential.
Thanks, Ed. You read it just like I wrote it.
I'd say check us in the mail, but with radio, that's not a good thing, you know. So
That's true.
That's true. As you may know, we recently chatted with Paul Myers, who chatted with you when he put together his excellent bio on John Candy, Life in Comedy. One of the things Paul and I talked about was the many instances in John's film career where art imitated life. In a way, I understand, you were witness to another such instance. I understand that you and John were putting together one of the radio shows you did together at the time he played Wink Wilkinson in Little House of Horrors.
Little Shop of Horrors, yeah.
Little House of Horrors is much different. That's right, Little Shop of Horrors.
yeah. This was he was actually shooting that at Pinewood Studios in England with Frank Oz as director and Rick Moranis as star. And that was one of the things that John used to do. He'd help friends out, like Rick, doing little bits. He did a movie with Dan Aykroyd, which was his only directorial movie. Same with Eugene Levy. But yeah, the London thing was interesting because he was basically over there with his mom and his aunt for the first week. He was there for 2 weeks, but he only had 1 day shoot. So that's a long time. So John doesn't like to sit around and do nothing. And they gave him a great per diem, and they gave him a driver 24 hours a day. So his mom and his aunt were there for the first week, and then they came back to Toronto. And then I came over, and we were going to be writing for a Canadian radio series called That Radio Show with John Candy that was ran for a year before he moved to L.A. And basically, his agent, John Gaines, had come over from L.A. just to make sure everything went okay, because I believe he was also Rick's agent or Steve's agent, one of the two, at the time at APA, Agency for the Performing Arts. And we went out to dinner one night, and John Gaines was telling John Candy, now don't forget, you got to get to bed early. Your call time is 6 a.m. And John that's like a red flag to John. He said, I'll show this guy. So he basically, we were at the Hard Rock in Chelsea, and I'd introduced him to, because I'd met Maureen Starkey, Ringo's ex-wife. She was married to Isaac Tegret, who owned the Hard Rocks, and I introduced them, and they got on like a house fire. And she just kept us there after it closed. And I don't think John got to bed before 2, but he did get up the next morning for 5 to go to the studio, and he was brilliant that day. I mean, he's always brilliant. I'm sure you've heard the story about him being kept up all night by Jack Nicholson during the Splash shoot, and he was brilliant that day, too.
I'm fortunate to count among my friends Robert Crane, who you know. And
Bob.
Yeah, and I don't know if, Bob was a Chongo. I don't know if you were officially a Chongo, but you knew most of the Chongos, and you were as close to John as Bob and the other Chongos were, particularly during that often frenetic stretch in the 80s.
Well, I think probably his closest Chongo would have been Frankie Hernandez, his so-called driver.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't drive much, but he certainly took care of John. He kept the fridge filled with healthy food, kept people away from him from the trail. Frankie was his ultimate Chongo for sure. And well, I think I might have been an honorary Chongo.
Well, the point is I've heard enough stories between you and Paul and Bob that John was a force of nature in the most positive sense of the word. I mean, he loved people, but at the same time, he also knew, and he would let you know that if he's going out in public, it's like, okay, be sure to come and get me after about 10 or 15 minutes, otherwise I'll never get out of here, So it's like he knew that, sometimes there was, there were ramifications with, when he was out in public in the thing. But he was also, the type of guy who would go on an excursion at the last minute, and because he loved life and he loved to discover things, and because he was John Candy, he could do a lot of things on a dime.
Well, the interesting thing about the London trip was that I was there for 7 days, and he did have just a one-day shoot. But the rest of the time, basically, we were either using the cover that he had, just going around sightseeing, or just going around London and doing shopping and things like that. He really loved exploring, you're right.
Doug Thompson is on the line with us. Doug Thompson, award-winning writer and producer of many radio programs and radio and TV documentaries, including shows that were carried on both the NBC and ABC radio network, as well as Radio Kandy, Candy spelled with a K, a weekly 2-hour show starring John Candy at the height of his film career that was not only carried by more than 350 radio stations across the U.S., but was best described. In fact, I don't know whether you coined this or whether John coined this, Doug, but I understand Radio Kandy in many ways was like SCTV, the essence of SCTV on the radio.
Yeah, that was John's premise for the original thing. We'd done the 2 series in Canada, and then he moved to L.A., of course, because his movie career was really heating up. And he just called me one day and said, "What do you think? Can we do something down here?" So I was creative director at a company called Telemedia Network here in Canada, which was the largest private organization for radio syndication. We also had the Toronto Blue Jays as radio rights and the Toronto Maple Leafs hockey team. So I said, well, we were dealing with a company in the U.S. called Unistar, Transtar actually, before they became Unistar. And so I called, make it a call, and they said, yeah, absolutely. So I flew to L.A., and John and I met with them, and that's when we created the show. We did the demo when he was shooting Who's Harry Crumb in Vancouver, and that's when he kind of came up with, I'd like to do like an SCTV on radio with comedy parodies, comedy commercials, comedy promos, that kind of stuff, but play the music that we have to play as well. So that's basically what we did. The premise of it was that John was this famous actor, which he was, and that he had unlimited funds, and he bought this fantastically powerful transmitter that could override any radio station, and kind of like the Outer Limits did at the beginning of their series, taking over the TV set, right? We would take over the radio station for 2 hours. So when we're doing the thinking for this, we're going, well, geez, if we have a transmitter and we're going to do all that, we do need an engineer. And then we both just instantly looked at each other and yelled, Scotty, from Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
And ironically, he happened to be Canadian as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we called his agent, and Jimmy Doohan was the guy, and he came in. He came in every week for the first year. He didn't do the second year because I think he'd recently gotten married at that point and was doing a lot more Star Trek conventions, driving around in his Winnebago, so we couldn't use him for the second year. But he was brilliant in the first year. He could ad-lib with John with the best of them. He was great.
Doug Thompson's on the line with us. Doug Thompson, award-winning writer and producer of many radio programs and radio TV documentaries, including 3 radio series with John Kandy. Doug is sharing some memories of working with John Kandy. We'll also talk about some of the other people that Doug has worked with throughout his career.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay Area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson, thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode.
Hi, this is James Sartorius, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
That's Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Kandy.
Actually, it's not Mr. John Kandy. It's Dr. Tongue. John's still down in the makeup room getting prepared for his part later in this presentation. So I thought I'd just take this time to tell you a little bit about our new weekly program called That Radio Show with John Kandy. But then I thought, what am I doing this for? We're paying Don Pardo big bucks here to be the announcer on this demonstration tape. Why not let him do it? So okay, Mr. Don Pardo, why don't you do your stuff and earn your money?
Right you are, Dr. Tongue.
Quick program now, in case you hear some construction type noises in the background, folks, you're not imagining. There is some work going on outside my building. We're doing our best we can to navigate. We apologize for the inconvenience. Let me ask you this, Doug. You mentioned he was making Who's Harry Crumb at the time you did one of the shows with them. You know, as we mentioned in our open, this was at the height of his movie career, where he was one of the bona fide box office stars.
Yeah.
So he, quote unquote, didn't need to do radio, but he loved doing radio. What was it about radio that you think John found so attractive?
Well, I know what he found attractive because he told me he grew up in Toronto listening to the top stations in Toronto, which were Chum at the time, CHUM, and then later Q107, which was a rock station on FM, and Chum FM, which was also rock. And John grew up loving music as well. So he just loved doing radio because first he didn't have to do any makeup, and then secondly he could just basically roll out of bed. We built a studio in the Prospect offices in Brentwood, and so we didn't have to go anywhere. The first few months we had to go to outside studios in Hollywood to do stuff until the studio was finished. But once it was done, he ended up using that for Radio Kandy, for the animated Saturday morning NBC cartoon series Camp Candy, and a bunch of all kinds of other stuff. And the Disney Rescuers Down Under, he recorded there. That was an interesting story, Ed. He wanted to record at his own studio there at Prospects, and Disney said, well, we have to have certain things that you need. So they basically said like a 2 or 3 page list of things, a certain microphone, which were almost obsolete because Disney had done things the same way for hundreds of years,
mm-hmm.
right? So our engineer, David Haydu, had to find all of these things that they absolutely had to have before we could record there. But he did, and they did record at Frostbacks.
I would also imagine, Doug, that one of the things that John loved about radio is it gave him the ability to improvise.
Oh, yeah. And to use the characters that he'd created on SCTV that he didn't get to do in movies.
And not only that, and this is something I learned from Paul. You know, Paul Myers, author of John Candy, A Life in Comedy. Doug Thompson is one of the people that contributed to Paul's book, but he was very loyal to his castmates on SCTV. And a lot of times, if the opportunity presented itself, he'd hire them for one of his projects. And almost all of the core cast members of SCTV at the time, one way or another, they contributed, I understand, to Radio Kandy.
Yeah, well, Joe Flaherty was a regular. Joe played several characters as well as different bits in the parody commercials. Joe was Commander Wes Steele, who was our traffic reporter, who did very strange things. Instead of sometimes doing traffic on a freeway or a highway, he actually would sometimes go to and these are all fake, of course, go to a Piggly Wiggly supermarket and do the traffic in the aisles. And it was very funny. And he also played a sportscaster. I can't remember what the character's name was, but he always screwed up all the scores. All of everything. You screwed up everything.
You worked with. For some reason they're hammering right above my roof. But as I say, we will soldier. Let's just roll with it. Can
I finish one thing though?
Go ahead.
Quickly on this, we did have everybody from Dave Thomas came in regularly, and I very distinctly remember one time when they were just ad-libbing John and Dave in the studio. And I remember Dave looking over to John and just mouthing the words, "Thank you," because he didn't get to do ad-libbing on the TV show he was doing, which was, I can't remember, Brett Butler TV series he was in. And he didn't get to do that. So they had fun doing that show. The only two that were never on the show was Rick Moranis, because he lived in New York, and it was difficult to do. And it was Catherine O'Hara. Now, Catherine... I love Catherine dearly. She's a phenomenally funny person. She came in one day and just ad-libbed with John throughout the whole show, and it was fabulous. I was saying, "Oh, good, we're going to have a great show." She called him the next day and said, "I think if this is in Paul's book,
it is. It is."
She called him the next day and said, "Please, I don't think I was funny. Don't use any of it." And I got down on my knees and begged John to let us use it. "Please, it's really funny." He said, "No, Catherine doesn't want to use it. We're not doing it." So none of that ever aired.
Well, that says a lot about the pride she took in herself as a performer. She knew her strengths and she knew what was comfortable. And even though as observers, you knew it was funny, if she wasn't feeling it, she didn't feel it was at her best. And again, going back to John's loyalty and the innate trust he had in her and all of his other castmates. I mean, that says a lot about John.
Yeah, exactly. He was always loyal that way.
Yeah.
The thing about the documentary that's out now, the Ryan Reynolds, Colin Hanks documentary, and Paul Myers book, and I'm almost finished Paul's book at this point. I'm on chapter 25, and I think there's only 28 chapters.
Yeah.
Is that they both focus on John's fears and his weight, and we had a few discussions about that in the 17 years that we were friends, but that wasn't what John was. He never, it really bothers me that he gave so much love and happiness to so many millions of people, and to be thought of like he was a terrified, frightened guy that was overweight. It's like, that's not the John I knew. That's not the John I remember. That's not the John I want people to remember.
Well, I have not seen the Ryan Reynolds Colin Hanks documentary, but I have read Paul Myers' book, Doug, and while while Paul touches on that a little bit, he doesn't make it...
A little bit more than a lot, but his is a very, very well done.
Yeah.
Very well researched book.
Yeah, he makes an attempt to present John as a full human being, and you really get a sense of his humanity. And for any times when he goes in that direction, he balances it with people who knew him, and like. To me, you mentioned Joe Flaherty and Dave Thomas.
Yep.
In many ways, those are the linchpins of Paul's book because they knew John as well as Joe is the one who brought John to Chicago. So it's like they so they're like the original three amigos. And so whenever you wanted like as close to John as possible, Paul would cut, so to speak, to Joe or Dave in his book. And again, that balances any of the other themes that, you just mentioned.
Well, the beauty of Joe is Joe was there are a bunch of them that could do this, but Joe could make John laugh anytime. He could just walk into the office and say, "Hiya, Johnny," and John would fall down laughing, you know? They had such a great rapport, all of those guys from Second City. Yeah,
and again, Joe and Dave, they understood John. They understood John better than anyone else, except possibly John Hughes.
Well, and Eugene too. Eugene was very, very close to John. Eugene Levy.
Doug Thompson's on the line with us. Doug knew Eugene Levy. He knew Joe Flaherty. He knew Dave Thomas. He knew John Candy. Those are just some of the many people that Doug has worked with in his long career in radio and television. Doug is sharing some memories of his career with us on our program today. Doug's going to stay with us for one more segment. We hope you'll stay with us as we continue our conversation with Doug Thompson here on TV Confidential.
If you're a diabetic, we have great news. You can end the painful finger sticks with a new CGM. Plus, they may be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance. If you use insulin or have had hypoglycemic events, you may qualify. Call US Med now to learn more.
800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. That's 800-432-8150.